in my presentation, I will first contextualize myself and my sort of research for a few minutes, and then I will go into details. I mainly focus on 15th century intellectual networks, and in general, my research is focused on 15th century. And when we look at the 15th century, what we see is basically from political point of view, three political entities: the Timurid Empire in Central Asia, Iran, and Armenia, Georgia, Kurdistan, and Diyarbakir, and in Syria and Palestine, and in Egypt, Mamluk Sultanate, and then in Western Anatolia and the Balkans, we see the Ottoman Empire, which was actually not an empire at that point. So it's a different picture. The Ottoman state, let's say, call it, it's still a struggling entity at this point. And then my research usually focuses on the Timurid Empire, which was founded by this figure called Timur or Tamerlane in European sources. Now, the Timurid history is famous for its sort of the intellectual and artistic efflorescence. It is when we look at the areas controlled by the Timurid Empire, and especially the cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. So what we see is grand scale building activities, and of course it wasn't just a building. It included scientific activities and manuscript production, art and poetry, etc. The most famous product of this period, is Sonia briefly alluded to, is the famous observatory in Samarkand, which was active between 1420 and until 1450 or 1449. It was founded by one of the Timurid princes, Ulugh, and then it still exists. Actually, if you go to Samarkand, you can visit the observatory, and the star tables that they prepared in this observatory was used by Islamic and European astronomers until, I believe, late 16th century. It was one of the important sort of astronomical sources of the early modern period. Now, this intense intellectual activity was actually, it was underpinned by a sort of exchange of manuscripts and ideas and scholars in distinct areas, from Central Asia to Anatolia to Cairo to Egypt and to India, and of course Iran, right in the middle. In my research, I mainly covered the Central Asia, Iran, and Western Asia part. And for practical reasons, at that time, I excluded the Indian component. But nowadays, there are students and colleagues who are working on the sort of South Asian, especially the Deccan part of the Republic of Letters or informal networks. I will discuss these terms in a minute. And then they sort of try to complete the picture. So I just put the names that I discuss in my book, and I studied. I usually use in my research. And I won't go into the details of each individual here, but I want to give a sort of a brief general profile of these individuals. Most of them belong to rich urban elite families. So what we see here is not a sort of poor man's intellectual activities. They were very, very influential figures. Some of them, especially, for instance, this Sayyid Sharif al-Jurjani here, he was a descendant of the Prophet. So in that sense, he was a very influential figure. But of course, I also have to add that we are talking about men exclusively here. So we don't have any, or I don't have any women that I could identify in my research. So if I put these individuals in a much more sort of on a chart, we see a sort of relationships between individuals, between rulers. Some of them are, for instance, Ulugh Beg or Berkuk here, Mamluk Sultan. These are political figures with strong intellectual interests, but others are just intellectuals who were active in different fields. I have to make one thing clear here. So most of these intellectuals were very, very prolific scholars. So they produced work in different disciplines. So I cannot simply say these were the sort of scientists and theologians and occultists and etc. So they published in different disciplines. So one of the distinguishing marks of this network is that, in my opinion, is the absence of rituals. So we have this network of intellectuals, which I call informal network, without sort of having sort of initiation ceremonies or lineages and distinguishing dresses and etc. This is, of course, important for me because at that time, in the 15th century, in the Islamic world, we also have the sort of emerging formal networks. So who were the formal networks? The formal networks were the Sufi orders in general. So Sufi orders emerged with sort of lineage connections, very hierarchical organizations, sort of the connections to the dervish lodges and etc. So they represented they emerged as the formal network. But the people that I were interested did not have those kind of distinct rituals. So that's why I call them informal networks. So what's an informal network? So I came up with a sort of relatively comprehensive definition in my book. It's an informal intellectual network. Is based on personal contact, communication, or correspondence between the participants. The members of an informal network often share similar philosophical, political, ideological, religious, and aesthetic sensibilities. The exchange of letters or pamphlets, the commitment to a methodological principle or to the bonds of friendship and family ties, the occasional attention of a particular patron, as well as not infrequent actual encounters among members kept such networks together and functioning. So I'm aware that this is a very, very loose definition. So I will try to sort of give a bit of more context to this definition. First, I will discuss what I understand from this correspondence. This is one of our weak points in Islamic studies because we don't have the personal archives of these scholars. So the kind of the personal papers or nakhlas or whatever you want to call them. So it is very rare to find sort of letters written by these individuals. Like the original letters are very rare. One of them is, for instance, the famous late Timurid intellectual Abdurrahman Jami's letter to the Ottoman Sultan. This original letter survived simply because it was written to an Ottoman Sultan, and the Ottomans were obsessed with keeping everything in their archives. And it is in the archives today, so we can actually study. But this is just one letter in the archive. Or another exception is the sort of the collection of correspondence, or the Majmuai Murasalat, which was compiled by Alishir Navai, another late Timurid intellectual. So Navai was a statesman and a very influential poet in Persian and in Turkic. And he basically collected the letters that he received and pasted them on an album, on paper. So these are all letters that he received, and then he pasted them on pages. So we have this sort of personal archive, but this is extremely rare. But don't we have other letters? Yes, we do, of course. We have the sources called Monshaat, or the correspondence. So we have many such collections in our libraries. In all manuscript libraries, we have examples of these munshat or collections of correspondence. But there is a problem with with these sources, because, as you said, this is a beautiful manuscript, like with these prepared for a very rich patron. So these collections were prepared for the stylistic value of these letters, because, as I said, these intellectuals were all extremely well educated individuals. They knew Persian and Arabic very well, and then they worked as scribes for the rulers. So their prose style was so beautiful, so beautiful. They were kept in manuscripts so that the later generations can imitate them. So this is one of the collections that I used very much in my work. So as you see, this includes a letter, for instance. Actually, the letter is signed by one of the Timurid princes, Ibrahim Sultan, but actually it was written by one of the guys that I worked on, Sharafettin Ali Yazdi. I mean, basically Yazdi was a scribe, or he was the ghostwriter, let's say. I mean, I presume we have the same thing today. I mean, when a state president writes a letter today, I'm sure someone writes for the letter for the president or the prime minister. So, or if you look at the bottom of the page, you see a sort of inscription. It's a sort of a kitabe or inscription. It's just they copied these inscriptions. There are many of these inscriptions in the collection. Mainly because it had a sort of beautiful style, and it was worth to imitate. So in that sense, it's a very important source, but we cannot. It's not a very healthy source, if I may use the term, because it has its limitations. And then, if I move to the rest of my definition, this having similar philosophical, political, ideological, religious, and aesthetic sensibilities. So I should say most of these individuals or scholars that I worked on had a soft spot for occult sciences, or mainly the science of letters. And the science of letters is a branch of Islamic sciences which studies the properties of the letters of the alphabet, and then based on these properties, they try to deconstruct the meaning or Gnostic hidden meaning of the Quran. So they were very much interested in this science, and one of the foremost representatives of this field was Saidettin Turka, or Ibn Turka, who died in 1432. So another one would be Abdurrahman al-Bistami in the western part of the geography in the Ottoman lands. He was also very much interested in the science of letters, and in this manuscript he sort of gives the sort of ancient alphabets. And as you see, this is supposed to be the alphabet of Hermes. So in that sense, they were sort of, especially Abdurrahman al-Bistami was very much interested in ancient sciences, so to speak. But I should say that these are just sort of known things in Islamic learned sciences. We have earlier sources which also talked about this kind of hermetic knowledge. Now, Bistami is important for my research because he wrote an important autobiography. So autobiographies are another set of sources that I used a lot in my research. And Bistami wrote this autobiographical work in which he tells about his netizens, if I may use the term, or his peers in his network, and then the books that he read. So And then most importantly, he gives a name. He gives a name to this network, and then he says this network was called Ikhwan Safa. Now, Ikhwan Safa is a very well-known earlier medieval Islamic philosophical network, with again sort of occult and maybe Ismaili. There's a debate still going on this topic. So basically, the Bistami imitated that earlier network, and then sort of tried to give a sort of, if I may use the term, a corporate identity to his personal network. And the other interesting aspect of this autobiography is that he gives the titles of the books that he read. And then some of them are very interesting. Again, it reflects his interest: Hermes' Guarded Secret, The Secret of Secrets, the Book of Cleopatra, The Light of Lights, etc. Some of these works might actually be apocryphal, or it's just I mean, definitely apocryphal. But when I mean, like, we don't have most of these books today, or we have yet to discover them. And then, after studying these sources, I realized that I still sort of, I noticed something which was very interesting, and then that was the overall political context. So when I wrote my book, I was actually very much interested in this issue, the dark matter, and then the discovery of the dark matter. And it is, I didn't put this example in my book, mainly because one of the referees said that, oh, maybe it's better you don't mention this, but I mean, I can mention this here. So when I read about dark matter, and then I read an article by Italian historian Carlo Ginzburg. So two of them came together perfectly, because the dark matter is basically a sort of physical phenomenon which we cannot measure, which we cannot see, but we know that it exists. How do we know it exists? It's based on its impact. This is actually from today's Guardian newspaper. It's just like researchers prepared a map of dark matter. If you go to the Guardian website today, you can read the article. And then the article say, we can't see it, barely understand it, but know that it exists because of the powerful influence it exerts on space. Now, I sort of thought, then can we study the Republic of Letters, not only based on the evidence that they left behind, like letters and autobiographies and this and that, but also based on their impact. So, and I realized that on various occasions, these intellectuals, a sort of specific group of intellectuals, clashed with political authorities in the Timurid Empire and the Ottomans. So in 1413 and 16, in 1426, 27, and 1446, in various political contexts, the political authorities suppressed certain intellectuals, and then, or the intellectuals that I was interested in my research. So and then I decided to distinguish, following Elizabeth's examples here. I decided to distinguish informal networks from the Republic of Letters. So informal network, Republic of Letters, is a form of informal network, of course, but it has a political relevance. So I decided that the Republic of Letter is an informal network which had political significance in a given historical moment. So what happened, basically, I argued that what happened in the 15th century, that while this sort of the formal networks and informal networks emerged in Iran, Central Asia, and the Ottoman Empire, the political authorities more and more sided with the formal networks, and we see that from historical records. The sultans converted to Sufi or accepted Sufi orders, and they established very close relationship with Sufi orders. and they suppressed informal networks, or they suppressed a Republic of Letters. I called Republic of Letters in the first half of the 15th century, but actually not in the second half of the 15th century, mainly because they lost their political relevance in the second half. And then here I would like to refer to the sort of famous work, Sociologist by Mark Grauenfetter, the weak ties gaining political significance. Thank you.